All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er update. Jed York speaks today in Orlando. We'll tell you what he said and what it all means. Coming up next, of course, we're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. We're also brought to you by MarinAutoglass.com, 415-883-3030. Underdog Fantasy, check that link in the description. Use the promo code Krug, KRUEG, and they'll match you up to your first $100. And thanks to Sharp Corners, Sports Cards and Collectibles, 205 Cypress Avenue in Pacific Grove. Call our friend Anthony Catania. He's at 831-521-5264 for all of your sports cards and collectibles needs. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Niners owner, Jed York. He spoke today in Orlando, the site of the owners' meetings, and he touched on a number of different things. He was asked right out of the chute what percentage of the team he owns, and he says the DeBartolos or the York, his family owns 90% of the Niners. So somebody else owns 10%. His family owns 90% of the Niners. He was asked about his deal that makes him the primary owner and, the guy as far as ownership. And he said it's not a big deal. They want the Niners in the family for years to come. And it's more of a just making things aligned correctly from within. I didn't said that there would be no new obligations or things that he would now be responsible for as the primary owner. Just more of a bookkeeping, and let's keep the Niners in the York family long term. The DeBartolo York family has owned the Niners going back to the mid 70s. So Jed seemed to kind of make sure to tell everybody, hey, it wasn't a big deal that he's taking over as the full-time owner of the team. He was asked about, his standard, like for the 49ers, that in the past he's, said that, hey, we celebrate Lombardi trophies here. And then in this last sit down with the media before the Super Bowl, he's like, hey, I would have been satisfied if Detroit had beaten the 49ers and basically make it seem like, hey, he was just happy to be in the playoffs. And, I know some of the media people asked him about that today. It's like the contradiction of, that we celebrate nothing but Lombardis during the Harbaugh era. And now you're falling short of Super Bowls and you're like, hey, we're just happy to be in the mix. And Jed obviously went off on this for a long period of time. And he just basically said, you can't be ashamed of successful seasons. And when you lose in the NFC Championship game or you lose in the Super Bowl by any measuring stick, that's been a successful season. And, he just refuses to be, ashamed of successful seasons. Obviously, they want to win championships, but the first key to winning championships is you got to get to Super Bowl Sunday. And Jed feels good about the fact that they've been able to get there and compete at that level, but obviously it hurts the fact that they haven't been able to climb to the top of the mountain. But he basically just said, hey, man, you can't be ashamed of having a successful season. He was asked about the draft versus free agency, and he said, man, you always have to build through the draft. And then he admitted that the Niners got lucky to take Brock Purdy in the 7th round, and they absolutely did. They traded all this draft capital for Trey Lance. It didn't work out. They drafted Brock Purdy in the 7th round. It did work out. They got lucky, but it's rare for teams to admit it. And today, Jed admitted it. He said, though, man, free agency is nice, but you have to build your team through the draft. So the Niners are very excited about the draft this year. They'll have their first and second round picks. They haven't had some of their high picks in recent years because of the Lance trade. And Jed's on record as saying you have to build your team through the draft. And then he even went on to say that he'd rather pay guys that the Niners draft than overpay some free agent from without, from the outside who doesn't know their culture, doesn't know their traditions, doesn't know what their expectation level is. He said he'd much rather pay guys that they draft and develop over overpaying in free agency. And I think that's actually probably the smart move as well. He was asked about how the team lost a 5th round draft choice by overpaying a 49er player $75,000. And he just admitted that they should have consulted the league sooner, that it was nothing nefarious. They weren't trying to gain any kind of an advantage, but they should have had better communication there. And clearly, you don't want to be losing draft picks. He was asked about Arik Armstead, if Armstead, wanted out or if he was unhappy. And Jed just revealed that Armstead asked the Niners if he could test his market value, and that Jed told Arik, "Hey, man, you're always going to be a Niner, and even when your career's over, come back, and you'll always be honored here," and this and that. And I think that probably is the classy move to do right there, is tell the free agent, "Hey, look, if you leave here, you're not burning a bridge, you're just moving on." But yeah, the Arik came to Jed and the Niners and said, "Hey, I would like to test my market value," and they granted him his wish to test that market value. He was asked about Brock Purdy and how Purdy's got one more year left before he has to be paid. And he said it's a good problem that Purdy will be the highest paid 49er and one of the highest paid players in the league. He said it's just perfectly normal. It's the way it goes. They paid Jimmy Garoppolo record-setting money for 45 minutes, and then the whole market jumped and has jumped several times since. And he also said that he feels that Brock Purdy has a chance to be an all-time great quarterback in the years ahead. So he's got great belief in Brock, that Brock can fulfill all potential and become a great player in the Niners system. So that's kind of cool to hear. And then let's, in this final update here, this is not necessarily Jed, but this is the Bills GM Brandon Beane talking about the Niners and Buffalo and how the league kind of screwed them out of a third-round comp pick by some of the moves they made. Let's hear from Brandon Beane right here.
It surprised me. I think us in San Francisco, we got a raw deal. It's just they're counting. I don't want to give a full thing, but we had separate Zooms with the league trying to go through how it was calculated, because by even their accounts, as we were checking with them through the year, we clearly had a third rounder. And so it's with all the conversions, the voids and things like that, numbers that are not really numbers. Like, for example, San Fran gave an example of one of their players that was really around a 17 APY was being counted as a 26 APY by the way they did the void with higher cap numbers at the end. And there's been so many of those in recent years due to COVID and where the cap was, that it fell into it and we missed, I'm talking like this, and it was a major blow because we had planned for that, and I know San Fran felt the same way.
Did you do anything after that with like an appeal of some sort? Like, how does that work?
We did our best, and they said no deal.
So there you go. Brandon Beane weighing in on both the Niners and the and the Bills, and they're unfortunately both got screwed out of a third-round comp pick, according to Beane. And you heard his displeasure there, and he felt like the 49ers didn't do anything nefarious either, that Buffalo didn't do anything wrong, and yet they both teams are frustrated that they lost a third-round pick. So overall, interesting discussion from Jed York. He downplayed, the big announcement that he's the owner. He admitted that you got to build through the draft. He admitted that he'd rather pay guys that they draft over re-signing free agents. Told Arik Armstead that, that he'll always be a Niner. Arik asked to test his market value. They granted him that. Says it's a good problem that Brock Purdy's going to be the highest paid Niner and one of the highest paid players in the league. And maybe my biggest takeaway out of this whole thing is that Jed says that Brock, in his mind, has a chance to be, an all-time great player in this league and in the years ahead. And I can't wait to see that. That will be a lot of fun to watch Brock develop into that kind of a player. All right, thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krug Show. Thanks to our other sponsors as well. And thanks to all of you guys for supporting the Krug Show on YouTube.